What's that?
War were declared.
Nutcracker.
Introducing Army Men Sarge's Heroes. Rated T for teen. The biggest little war there is for the PlayStation game console and Nintendo 64. Army Men Sarge's Heroes. Real combat, plastic men. Good to go.
Okay.
Party time.
Okay, so, I played through Army Men Sarge's Heroes, and I'm gonna sit here and talk about it for a little bit. Thanks for stopping by, really appreciate it. We're gonna start off with the basics. This game was developed and published by 3DO. It was developed over the course of about a year. Sarge's Heroes is the fourth game in the Army Men series. It was the third out of 5 Army Men games to be released in the year 1999. That's insane, by the way. That is way too many games for 1 year. But it's not the most Army Men games that came out in a single year. That honor lies with 2001. 2001 had 6 Army Men games. We worry about oversaturation in the games market nowadays, but back then, it was a very different feel. It's a third-person shooter with platforming and action elements. The series started off on PC with some top-down RTS action, but quickly moved to third-person with Army Men 3D. Sarge's Heroes was next in line, and it spawned its own sub-series focusing on Sergeant Hawk, the titular character. It only released in the US and the EU, so no luck for Japan on this one. I'd say it probably makes a lot of sense that a game this focused on what is obviously the US military, circa about the 1940s, to not really be expected to be a success in Japan. That's probably the biggest reason it never made its way out over there. It did come out on 4 different consoles, though. And not just that, it sort of came out in 2 different versions. The N64 version was the first to come out, followed by the PlayStation 1 version. The Dreamcast version was next, and it was based on the N64 version, while the PC version was the last to come out and was based on the PlayStation 1 version. The release dates break down like this. The US got the N64 on September 28, 1999, the PlayStation 1 on February 23, 2000, the Dreamcast on October 31, 2000, and the PC sometime in late 2000, though I couldn't find an exact date for it. The EU got the 64 version on April 14, 2000, the PlayStation 1 version on August 17, 2000, the Dreamcast on November 17, 2000, and the PC version on December 15, 2000. It's important context that this game came out on a lot of different platforms and was a pretty major title. We'll get into the differences between the different versions here in a little bit and talk more about them, but for the most part, we're going to focus on the 64 version. Since we're focusing on the N64 version, let's look at the specialized hardware. Packs. Which ones matter here? Well, let's take a look. The game pack? Yes, the game is on a pack. Controller pack? Yeah, it's required for saves. Though there's also a password system if you don't have one because you're poor or something. Expansion pack? Yep, it allows for a 640 by 240 high resolution mode. The rumble pack? Yeah, it'll give you those good vibrations as you pull the trigger to end the lives of enemy soldiers. Transfer pack? No, this isn't Pokemon. It doesn't use the VRU either. Let's hop back to the game pack real quick. So, you might not remember this, but back in the day, games came in cardboard boxes, and they were physical goods that you purchased. Let's take a look at that. Here's the box for Army Men Sarge's Heroes on the N64. Real combat. Plastic men. As you can see, it's designed for the expansion pack and all the other packs that we talked about, has up to 4-player multiplayer. And we've got the awesome screenshots on the back here. Look at those. Don't those look crazy cool? Confidential. Oh, 600 hours. Tan forces captured Bravo Company commandos. General Plastro has new weapons of mass destruction, magnifying glass, M80 firecrackers, and the garbage disposal. This is a job for Sarge. Requisition M60s, shotguns, bazookas, flamethrowers, grenades, sniper rifles, mortars, minesweepers, and plenty of ammo. Good luck, soldier. And then, of course, we've got the people we're rescuing. Thick, Shrap, Scorch, Hoover, and Riff. It's a nice little box. There's nothing too special or standoffish about it. There's the key art that you see everywhere, which you also see on the top and the bottom. There you go. That is the box. Let's check out the manual. The manual, of course, has the same key art, and we're going to be using this manual throughout this video, but it's got a bunch of different really good sections that are helpful, including the controls, which are necessary information to have, information about the different game modes, pickups, multiplayer, weapons, enemy forces, all the stuff that you need to know, including a hints and tips section, which is very useful. It's a good manual. It does give you a lot of really good information. There's even a point in the back where it goes through different missions and what you can expect in them. So it actually does give you a ton of really good information. It's all on glossy paper, really well made stuff. Here's the PlayStation version. It's very much the same as you might expect. Mine has, some protection stuff on it, because it was originally the property of Video Time 2. Either way, same blurb on the back, all the same stuff, some different screenshots, but that's about it. Aside from that, it's the same packaging overall, except this one comes with an Army Men Air Attack demo, which is pretty cool. I have two versions of the PC. Here's the standalone version. This one is from, I believe, England, especially because it was 99 pennies. 99 1/100ths of a pound, if nothing else. And yeah, I'm pretty sure this was a late version release. Either way, that's what the box looks like for that. Over here we had a value pack that came with 4 different Army Men games. Sarge's Heroes, World War, Air Attack, and the original Army Men. We got system requirements, and there's all the game discs. So there you go. And finally, the Dreamcast version. This one has a different key art entirely, which is pretty cool. It almost has a different style to it. And it has an expanded blurb on the back. So after what we already get, you get for a little R&R, you can play battle mode with up to 3 friends. Only you can shut down Plastro's portals and bring peace to the plastic world again. Good luck, soldier. And again, some upgraded screenshots. Very nice. The manual for this is, of course, tucked into the front. But it has very much the same information. Just a little updated.
Now that we've taken a peek at the physical goods, and we've gotten some context on the history of the game itself, let's jump into what the game actually is. And we'll start that by looking at the story. In a miniature world full of plastic men and women, you play as Sergeant Hawk, leader of Bravo Company. He's part of the virtuous Green Army, which stands in opposition to the despicable Tans. Remember, the only good Tan is a melted Tan. The Green Army is led by Colonel Grimm, while the Tans are led by General Plastro, a cruel dictator. The game begins with a sneak attack being carried out on the Green base where Sarge and his 5 best commandos are stationed. The first order of business is to save Colonel Grimm and get him evacuated safely. By the time we do that, we realize that our best soldiers have been taken captive. Now, we have to save them one by one to rebuild our forces, and then we can take the fight back to Plastro. The soldiers in question are Riff, the saxophone-playing bazooka man, Hoover, the nerdy minesweeper, Trap, the surfer with a gift for mortars, Thick, the dim-witted machine gunner, and Scorch, the pyromaniac flamethrower. And of course, we can't forget about Vicky. Vicky is the daughter of Colonel Grimm, love interest of Sarge, and the only character that has more than one color on her body. Wonder why that is. It's probably not important. Anyways, as the story progresses, Vicky gets caught up in the action and also ends up captured by the devious General Plastro. Not only that, but it turns out that Plastro has discovered portals to another world. Our world. He's been bringing back new super weapons through these portals to help him take over. It looks like we have our work cut out for us. Let's look at how we're gonna fight back.
Sarge's Heroes has 16 levels of single-player content to play through. You'll probably be able to get through it in less than 8 hours, especially on lower difficulties. I said before that it's a third-person shooter, and as you play through, you'll complete a variety of different objectives. Everything from escaping a sandbox to navigating a minefield. One thing to note is that after you find out about the portals, you end up going through them. This means that about half the missions take place in a world where everything is sized appropriately for the soldiers, and half the game takes place in our world, where they're appropriately sized as toys. There's some neat Easter eggs we're going to talk about here in a little bit that are only possible because of the whole crossover with our world thing. You'll also encounter a variety of enemies to defeat, some more dangerous than others. The regular tan soldiers are easy enough to dispatch, though some of them will be a bit harder to handle than others, especially when you're late in the game and some of them will have rocket launchers and things like that. You'll also run up against tanks, helicopters, giant bugs, and even giant robots with Gatling guns for arms. Thankfully, you shouldn't be ill-equipped to deal with the challenges you end up facing. There's 13 weapons that can be found throughout the game. You'll always have your trusty M16, but you can also rely on the shotgun, the bazooka, the sniper rifle, flamethrower, and a whole lot more, frankly. There's a tool for every occasion. Just remember, if you lose a life, it's back to the regular old M16 until you pick up more weapons. So you have plenty of weapons to use, but I will say the game doesn't always make it easy to use them. The controls in this game are bad. Very bad. And frankly, confusing until you get used to them. Even on release, the controls were pretty widely panned as being terrible. It's one of the two biggest complaints against it. I'm lucky I'm a big enough nerd that I have the manual for this game, because without it, I would have just had Google and a prayer to figure out some of the controls. For example, the control stick handles movement and turning. So what about strafing? Well, in order to strafe, you have to hold in C right and then move the control stick left and right. Okay, fine. Right bumper jumps you into first-person view for precision aiming, but unless you're perched somewhere with a sniper rifle, it's almost useless because of how slow it is. Add in the fact that you crouch with the C down, but you stand up using the jump button, which is A, and you've kind of got a confusing mess to deal with all around. All that to say, these controls really suck, and there's only so much excusing that can be done. Now, I did say there were two major complaints. The camera. The camera in this game is what some might call unwieldy, but I would call unresponsive garbage. The biggest reason for this is because the game is on a system where the controller only has one thumbstick. We wouldn't solve shooter combat on consoles for another console generation or two, so they decided they wouldn't have any control over the camera basically at all for this game. You see, in Mario 64 they allowed you to control the camera using the C buttons. You want to see more to the left? Simply push C right. More to the right? Push C left. In this game, the only way you had to control the camera was to stop, rotate your character, and hope that the camera would eventually pick up on what you're trying to do. Even when you know what you need to do, the camera is so slow that half the time, you're just kind of hoping you'll be able to see what enemy is firing at you so you can move out of the way or return fire, and the other half of the time, you'll be blind firing and hoping you're hitting the right folks. Honestly, it isn't such a big deal in the campaign because most of the levels are fairly linear, though there's always bad guys hiding behind corners, in caves, on top of hills, and they can become a worry as you go through. It's really the multiplayer where the camera woes are especially painful though. And since we've brought up multiplayer now, let's talk about that for a bit. As we know, if the single player is the initial draw of the game, the multiplayer is what you'll stick around for. I managed to convince a couple of my friends to swing through for a bit and play the multiplayer to see how it feels nowadays. Bearing in mind that the controls are weird, the camera is sluggish, and even though we'll be getting into it in a moment, the frame rate is really quite terrible, we had a shockingly good time. Now, part of that comes down to the fact that we're friends hanging out and playing literally any game together, but honestly, the game is so hard to control that it feels balanced in a weird way. It's hard to describe, but it feels like if somehow you put 100 hours into the multiplayer of this game, you'd still only be so much better than somebody with no experience at all. Either way, we spent so much time laughing at how the game felt and how random and ridiculous some of the kills felt that I can't help but recommend it. It made for a hilarious good time, and perhaps shockingly turned out to be one of the best features of the game. Let's dig into some of the hard facts about the multiplayer while we're at it though. This is traditional shooter multiplayer. You start with one gun and pick up others around the map. Unless you're playing on family mode, which gives you at least a few rounds of ammo for each weapon in the game. You can play to 3, 5, or 10 kills, and you've got about 8 maps to choose from, varying in size from itty-bitty to way too big for 4 players. For reference, Fort Plastro is the equivalent of playing Shipment from Call of Duty, and Base is like a Warzone map. Some of the maps have portals strewn about them that you can warp to a different area, which can be really useful, say, if you want to be warped onto a toilet paper dispenser with a sniper rifle. Like I said, the multiplayer is great and weirdly way too fun. I actually really recommend that. Now, I did mention the frame rate being an issue and said we were going to talk about it. So we're going to talk about it, along with the rest of the graphics. The graphics. With the expansion pack installed, you can turn on the high resolution mode. I don't suggest it. You see, it took me a while to get used to the controls, but the frame rate in this game, I don't know if it's even possible to get used to it. I have no idea how I played this game so much when I was younger and I never noticed it. Maybe it was just the times and I never knew how bad we had it, but this game's frame rate is downright deplorable. Single digits at times when the action heats up, and it's never steady. I don't have access to the fancy stuff that Digital Foundry does, but I did find some open source software called Teardrop that should give you a decent idea of what we're working with here. It's a slideshow at times. So yes, sticking to low resolution and even turning on the letterbox mode can help with it, but nothing is going to solve it. Sometimes the game manages to actually hit 60 FPS, which is amazing, but it never lasts for more than a few seconds before falling right back on its face. I had to stop playing the game at times because it actually made me sick to my stomach. I'm not a frame rate snob, but this may have changed something in me. I'd say that more than the frame rate being bad, it's the inconsistency that really kills it. It feels like the game is speeding up and slowing down constantly. God help you if there's a fire on screen. Ugh. Now that we're in the graphics department though, let's look really quickly at the different versions of the game so we can get a comparison here. The N64 version of the game has its problems, but compared to the PlayStation version, you'd assume it was made by a team of geniuses. The PlayStation version has worse graphics, terrible loading times, and just in general is a completely inferior version. Save for one thing. We'll get there. The PC version is based off the PlayStation version, so even though it's on the PC and you can sort of pump up the quality of the game, it only gets you so far. I will say that installing this game, which came out in 2000 and was designed to run on Windows 98, was amazingly simple on my computer that I finished building in 2023 and that runs Windows 10. I ran the installer and launcher in compatibility mode, and it just sort of works. Anyway, there are some advantages to the PlayStation and PC version. They have higher quality sound because that's CD based, they have pre-rendered cutscenes, and they have a full voiceover for the cutscenes. Past that, they are the worst versions though. The N64 version looks better than the PlayStation, but the best looking version of the game is 100% the Dreamcast version. There isn't even a bit of question in my mind about that. Not only does it look the best, but it takes all the best features of the different versions and combines them. The PlayStation being on CD means that they could include that voiceover I mentioned. So the Dreamcast version has the graphics and gameplay of the N64 version, but with upgraded models, voiceover from the PlayStation version, and it also has the best draw distance of any of them. If you're going to play this game and you have the option, the Dreamcast is the way to go. For the record, and so it's known I suppose, the N64 and PlayStation versions were both developed and published by the 3DO company. The PC version was published by GT Interactive, and the Dreamcast version was developed by Sapphire and published by Midway. And now that we've talked about what the game looks like, let's talk about what it tastes like, sounds like. I am hungry. The audio. This game is almost entirely unvoiced because it's on the N64, but we do get little snippets here and there from Sarge throughout the game. Mostly he's saying things like,
"Party time,"
and the like. It's a shame we're missing out on the voice acting too, because even though almost all of the voice work is done by one man, that man happens to be Jim Cummings. This guy's been doing voices for film and TV since the 80s, and he's well celebrated in the industry. He also has a podcast called Tuned In, which is just sort of neat that I found that out while researching this. The voice of Vicky is provided by Susan Blue, another voice actor who's been in the business just as long with an equally long list of works. It really is a shame that the 64 version misses out on basically all of their performances. The sound effects are decent, if not a bit crunchy. The guns all have different firing sounds, so that's pretty good. Decent explosion sounds too, so that's nice. Nothing too out of the ordinary there. The music is what you'd expect from a military game. It's very militant. Fantastically so, in fact. Marching drums and high-tension strings are everywhere here. No butt rock or 90s drum and bass like you get from other N64 games. Until you get to the bathroom level, which takes a weird, unexpected turn into both of those genres. Anyway, it's a fine soundtrack. I'm not putting it on my phone. I'm not listening to it outside of playing the game, but it's fine. It does its job. Now we're going to talk about just some cool things I found out about this game while I was researching it. You've already seen the old commercial I dug up at the start of the video, but there's a lot of print advertising for this game too. They were playful ads that leaned into the toy-focused aspects of the game, with just enough of that 90s edge and attitude that the kids just loved. In one of the ads, we see Sarge and the team wading through a cereal bowl. Start your day fortified with air troops, ground troops, and 8 essential vitamins. Oh, Sarge, you're such a guard. In the other ad, we see them freezing tan troops into an ice cube tray. Always freeze your leftovers. Oh, you do go on. And of course, the tagline. Real combat. Plastic men. While we're talking about print media, let's look at some guides for this game. The full print guide that I have here from Prima, was written by Eric Lionel Pratt, is actually sort of amazing to me. You see, the quality of it is so high. Every page is full color and glossy. These must have cost a fortune to produce. The guide is so thorough that it starts off with numbered stats of each character's health and how much damage each weapon does, something that's never brought up in the game itself. It also has a list of codes needed to access each level, you know, in case you want to skip around. Each level gets its own section, which starts with a map of the level, completely marked out with weapon locations. The only thing missing is enemy placements, but that doesn't really seem to matter when you have screenshots guiding you through each encounter with the enemies in the game. It even has a section in the back of the guide for multiplayer maps, with the locations of each weapon spawn. That way, when you invite your friends over to play, the Mad Catz controller you hand them will be the least of their problems. But let us not forget that magazines also like to print guides, and no magazine was more famous for it than Nintendo Power. For the release of Sarge's Heroes, Nintendo Power put out an 8-page guide that leads you through the first 9 stages of the game. While the Prima guide had screenshot-style maps, the Nintendo Power guide has maps that were made by hand. They still serve the same purpose well, but they don't look quite as nice, I'd say. While also giving you lots of screenshots and plenty of solid guidance, the Nintendo Power Guide isn't nearly as detailed. Not that there's anything wrong with that, mind. It's 8 pages of a magazine, not an entire dedicated guidebook. Obviously, it's going to be more condensed. Still, it is a nice bit of help if you feel like you need it. Now we're going to talk about cheats and Easter eggs. So let's dive in. The cheats in this game are entered in a menu off the main menu called Input Codes. It's simple enough to get to and enter. The cheat codes for this game are a mess though, and we're going to get into why that is in a minute, but let's talk about where I got these codes from first. The first source that I have for cheats is the Prima guide that I talked about earlier. Simple enough, it's got all the level select codes, all weapons code, and the max ammo code. These ones definitely all work. Next up is the list of codes you can find on several different websites. GameSpot, IGN, Game FAQs, even Cheat Happens, whatever that site is. Some of the codes in this are just kind of weird and wrong, frankly. I tested out all the codes to see what the story was and managed to find out some interesting things along the way. First off, the codes for all weapons, max ammo, and mini mode all work. So do the codes to play as Plastro, Vicky, and Tin Soldier, which just makes whatever character you're playing as shiny silver instead of their base color. The code for all characters in multiplayer mode works too, and so does the attack mode cheat, though I couldn't actually figure out what it does. It accepts it as valid, if nothing else, but it doesn't unlock any new single or multiplayer game modes. Maybe it makes the enemies attack more viciously? I really couldn't notice any differences, though. But I'd love to find out what this does. If you know, please let me know, because I'm really curious about this. The other code that works for sure is the test display code. This gives you a bunch of numbers on your screen that tell you different information about your character. The cutting room floor filled me in on what they actually mean. They're the X, Y, and Z positions of your character, the direction you're facing out of 360 degrees, the angle of tilt, and then the next 2 sets of numbers are also the X, Y, and Z positions, though they're of specific points on your character's body. Again, this is a test mode, so you might imagine this information being incredibly handy for figuring out why particular bugs are happening. I think it's really cool that we get a little peek at things like this sometimes. So what's the deal with these other codes then? Well, maybe they're codes from other versions? I thought that might be the case, so I gave it a go. Living Large, the code for a giant mode, does work on Dreamcast, so that's cool. But none of the others did. STP-DMN, the code reported to play as Hoover, is actually the code to play the mission where you rescue Thick. This probably just got jumbled at some point. It happens. But what about these other codes? I found out what the story is with those again, thanks to the cutting room floor. As it turns out, there's 5 codes that are commented out in the code of the N64 version. and minus the jumbled mission select code, it's the same ones on these lists. At some point, I'm guessing that a full list of codes got sent out to publications and nobody ever checked to see if they really work, because even today, they're still listed with all the working codes. Except for Neoseeker. Apparently Neoseeker tested the codes and came to the same conclusion that some of them just don't work. Hell, the all levels code is actually given to you at the end of the game and it still doesn't work. So why are these codes commented out then? Well, there could be a few different reasons for that. Don't forget that the game was made in less than a year. It's entirely possible that these codes were just broken in some way, as mentioned on the cutting room floor regarding the living large cheat. Apparently that one can cause you to get stuck climbing ledges and the like. So assuming the deadline was coming up and they couldn't get it working, just comment it out, call it a day. What does it matter? It was an extra anyway, right? Seems plausible to me. That would explain why it's the only one of these codes to show up in the Dreamcast version. They probably just had the time to fix it. The Unlimited Continues cheat also doesn't make sense, as the game doesn't even use a continue system. That may have been a change made later in development, so they just dumped it because it was unnecessary. The other codes, Invincibility and Invisibility, I'm not sure about. There's a code in the Dreamcast version that gives you Invincibility, but it also gives you all weapons and uses a different input code to begin with. So I don't think it's the same code, just fixed. I think it's an entirely different code that they managed to create. All of that to say, I don't know an exact reason why some of these codes don't work and were commented out, but it's a pretty safe assumption that they probably just didn't work. Anyway, other cool stuff from the cutting room floor requires a Game Shark, and since we don't have one of those... Oh, wait a minute. I do have one of those. Well, since we have one, let's take a look at the Game Shark codes. The Game Shark allows us to set up some codes and crack the game open a little bit. We've got a cheat menu code, a test menu code, a level select code, and another way to turn on the debug display we saw earlier that gives us location data on the player. The cheat menu gives us instant access to a bunch of different cheats right from the pause menu. No code inputs required. It even gives us back those codes that were commented out. The test menu gives us access to some options that are phenomenally cool. The gamma correction option corrects for gamma differences, I assume. It definitely changes the gamma either way. The dither effect adds a noticeable dither to the graphics. The cutting room floor said it doesn't know what this is, but with an HDMI mod installed, it's pretty obvious what it is. Display B-boxes displays the interactive elements of the game. Wireframe is really neat and gives you a full wireframe output without textures. White GB turns on an all-white background for wireframe mode. Plastosheen, TM, turns off the special reflection technology that was one of the key selling points of the game on release. It really sold the whole look of the characters being plastic. Profile info doesn't seem to do anything. Position info is a third way to turn on that position data overlay. Test order doesn't seem to do anything obvious, and it's the same story with switch camera. It's a really cool peek behind the scenes again, if nothing else. The level select menu lets you jump freely between levels as you please, right from the pause menu. So, there you go. That's all the cheats I could find and my theories on why some of them don't work anymore. Now then. Easter eggs. The easiest egg to find is right at the start of the game. You can find Vicky hiding out in the barracks in the training course. She has some nice words of encouragement for you. One of the later missions has some candles sitting on a table, and if you hit them with the flamethrower, they actually light. That's just such a neat little touch to have, especially at the time this game came out. I also asked around on the N64 subreddit, and the Breadman Riseth pointed out a few things that I'd missed along the way. On the same level as those candles, you can find an N64 box underneath the Christmas tree. It looks like it's completely accurate, save for the missing Star Wars Stormtrooper on one side, probably a victim of licensing issues. In another level, where you're rescuing prisoners of war, you find out that the Tans have been melting down the greens using a dastardly device to turn them into bugs. The device in question is actually a creepy crawler's machine. Now, growing up in the 90s, my older brother actually had one of these, and I remember playing with it. It was essentially an easy bake oven for boys, with the caveat that everything that came out of it was plastic and inedible, but with the benefit of everything coming out of it being really gross and usually bug-shaped. Gross out humor was huge for kids back then, and this was really popular as far as I know. Thank you again to the Breadman Riseth for pointing out these really neat touches in the game. So that's it for the Easter eggs on the N64 version, but I do want to point out that the Dreamcast version had a ton of extra Easter eggs too. There's codes added in that completely change the textures into a bunch of different faces. Past that, there's also a picture of a hidden girl inside of a beam in a barracks on the first level. You'll need to position your character in exactly the right way to clip the camera into the beam and see it. Finally, there's the infamous scary face Easter egg. This was posted a few years ago on YouTube by Sizable Door. If you lay down and crawl under a wall in the Scorch level, you'll find a room with a repeating face that appears to be having a bit of a bad day. I checked out the N64 version to see if there was anything there, and no, there isn't. It's sort of just a glitched area where you can't really do much. Next, we're going to talk about previews, reviews, and websites. We had some neat previews in the print rags at the time. The EGM preview points out that 3DO were claiming at the time that this would be the first third-person 4-player game on the N64. Whether or not that's true, I'll leave to the real historians out there, but after a quick Google search, I didn't turn up any earlier results, so as far as I can tell, they were accurate with that. The EGM preview and the GamePro preview both pointed out that the game looked a lot better already compared to Army Men 3D. Hey, at least this was an upswing in the series. Some people to this day consider this the best game in the Army Men series, though I would be surprised if the follow-up wasn't more highly regarded. Might be worth investigating in the future. Put a pin in that for now. Of course, there's an official website to look at. We've got a classic landing page set at armymen.com that features 4 further sections to check out: the game, interact, downloads, and support. In the game section, we've got a general explanation of what the game is, of course. Plastic toy soldiers have come to life on the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation game consoles. In an amazing variety of mouth-watering animations. Why are they mouth-watering? Sarge, the hero of the Green Army, attacks across countertops, through hallways, and into the backyard, fighting for the green way of life. If the tan enemy manages to secure the explosive skyrockets, horrifying magnifying glasses, or the deadly garbage disposal, the balance between good and evil could be shifted forever. It's real combat. Plastic men. Key features. Stunning graphics. Realistic movements bring the plastic soldiers to life and show their deaths with funny animations. 9 different characters with loads of personality. Plastosheen, TM, lighting effects. First of its kind, highlighting gives soldiers an amazing plastic sheen. Plastic world and real world environments. Variety of worlds including the plastic world, where Sarge is life-size, and the real world, where he's only 2 inches tall. 14 missions with up to 5 separate objectives each. Hours and hours of gameplay. 13 weapons with spectacular effects. Magnifying glasses, spray cans, and skyrockets add a whole new dimension to warfare. Split and quad, Nintendo 64 only, screen multiplayer modes. Family mode, recommended for the young at heart, ages 6 to 106. Supports RAM Pack and Rumble Pack, N64. Supports DualShock analog controller, PlayStation game consoles. Next we have Interact, which leads to the 3DO message boards. Better check out the cyber rules of the road before trying to get into that. It doesn't work anymore. Next we have Downloads, which has everything from cool game screenshots, bios of the characters, wallpapers, CG renders, and even QuickTime movies. Better have fast dial-up for those, though. Finally, we have the support page, which leads to the current 3do.com. Weirdly. I guess you can buy a shirt, though, so that's cool. Nintendo's website at the time also had an entry for Sarge's Heroes. It got a picture of the box, some screenshots, and of course, some interesting information. For instance, this is the only place I've found that lets us know that the size of the game is 64 megabits. Pretty cool. It's mostly what you'd expect, though. The rest of it we've more or less seen at this point. I will say that whoever wrote this was lying through their teeth when they said that the frame rate doesn't suffer in the multiplayer. Absolute hogwash. Humbug, even. Alright, next up, reviews at the time. Most of the reviews ranged from 5 to 7 out of 10. Not only do I see why that's the average review, I completely agree with it. This is the most 6 out of 10 game I can think of. Don't get me wrong, it has its upsides, but from the clunky controls to the awful frame rate, this game has a lot more downsides. I feel like the only reason I have any real fondness for it boils down to having it as a kid and the excitement I had when I played it with my friends. But let's dig into the reviews a little further. EGM had 4 reviewers take a look at it, and the biggest thing they agreed on was that the control was awful and the camera doubly so. To quote John, "It seems to take your inputs as more of a hint as to what to do rather than an actual command, then refuses to keep the camera focused properly on the action. The crappy frame rate doesn't help things either." All very much agreed on my part. Their average review is 5.75 out of 10. GameFan had 3 folks take a look at it, and while the complaints about the controls remain, they also pointed out that the series was already being milked for all it's worth. Again, rightfully so. Average of 78 out of 100. GamePro said more or less the same. With a better control set, Sarge's Heroes could have been a 4-star game instead of the career kernel it turned out to be. Ouch. War is hell. Sarge's Heroes is heck. Okay, that one made me laugh a little. They gave it a 3.75 out of 5. Next Gen Magazine managed to complement the size of the levels and knock the controls all at once. Still, the levels are well designed and huge, and fighting through each mission takes planning, stealth, and because of the camera, a little luck. 3 out of 5 stars. Nintendo Power themselves gave it a 7.4, mentioning its play control is too loose for comfort, but also noting single-player mode has variety, humor, lots of action, and some fun surprises in a mission-style adventure with a great selection of weapons. Finally, we've got Q64, a magazine that you've also now heard of. Now, Q64 is a magazine that puts Sarge's Heroes on the cover. I wonder what they thought of it. They gave it an 8 out of 10 and acknowledged that while the camera is an issue, the game is still fun even with the downsides. But hey, they also put it on the cover. Just saying. Either way, I feel like a 6 or a 7 is probably a really fair score for this game. I'd probably give it a 6.5 myself. The other reviewers were on the money, and the controls were simply infuriating, especially later in the game. But the characters, story, and setting do give it a little special something that I really did love as a kid, and even revisiting it as an adult, I still found that I really did love that. Alright, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Now then, value and pricing. GamePro said it would be $45 when it was new, but I found a print ad that says otherwise. When the game was new, it was... Oh my god, is that Tail Concerto for $45? Oh my god, can you imagine buying Tail Concerto for $45? Sorry, I got a little distracted there. That's on me. What were we talking about? Right. Anyway, it was $60. That seems fine. Average cost of a game, you know. Tail Concerto for $45. Oh my god. We were so unwise back then. Right, if you want to play Sarge's Heroes now, though, it's a lot cheaper than it used to be, but you're going to have to buy a cartridge unless you download an emulator. Nobody's put out any remakes, remasters, or anything else for this game. There are a few games in the Army Men series that have been put out on GOG and Steam, but this is not one of them. You can pick up a loose cartridge for the N64 for about $14 right now. The PlayStation version is about $8, the Dreamcast version is around $17, and the PC version is basically guesswork, probably not more than $20, I'd say. So that's it. Army Men Sarge's Heroes. If you want to play it, I really suggest you play the Dreamcast version. It's easily the best version, and it has everything the N64 version had, and more. And that being said, the controls and camera are rough on any version of this game that you do decide to play. And that's not going to change anytime soon. Unless there's a remake on the horizon. There are a few spiritual successors out there too, so... I think Mean Greens is a game that you can play. I think it's just multiplayer though. Don't think it has a story. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you wouldn't mind, and if you enjoyed what you saw, then feel free to drop a subscription down below. I don't make content regularly, or at least not as regularly as I should, but every once in a while I do like to make one of these review videos and get back to some old N64 games that I really love. If you played this game at any point, let me know down in the comments below, but aside from that, I'll see you next time. Have a great one.